Welcome to Taking the Edge Off the Middle East with Brian Katulis, a series of casual conversations on the most important events in the Middle East region today. I'm Brian Katulis, I'm Senior Fellow here at MEI, and today I'm joined by two special guests, Shira Efron and Ibrahim Dalalsha. Ibrahim Dalalsha is the founder and director of Horizon Center for Political Studies and Media Outreach. He's one of the leading analysts of Palestinian politics in the region. Every morning, I read his update on what is happening in Palestine, and it's the most informative newsletter that you can sign up for and subscribe to. Before he was founded the Horizon Center, he served for 2 decades as a senior political advisor at the U.S. consulate, when we had one of those, in Jerusalem, advising U.S. officials on the peace process. Shira Efron, Dr. Shira Efron, is Israel Policy Forum's research director. Shira and I actually worked together for many years at a place called the Center for American Progress. You were based in Israel at the time, and we are recording this on February 26th, Wednesday. This will be released several days after we record this, days which we think a lot of things will happen. So I stipulate that because we've got the end of the ceasefire, the first phase between Israel and Hamas happening, the last hostage releases and prisoner releases that come with that, but then some big question marks that may be answered after we release this podcast. But first of all, I've got an Israeli and a Palestinian in the same room. You guys are friends? You work together?
We do. Yes, definitely. And
do you agree on everything?
We talk every day.
I think we came to be friends because we're at many levels we're like-minded.
Yes.
And that actually sort of like helped build this contact and relation over not too many years. I mean, like maybe 4 or 5 years now.
COVID.
Yes. And
friendship formed over Zoom and WhatsApp. Text.
Well, that's interesting. I'd cite that because here we are, and it's been a devastating war for the Palestinian people, but also for the Israeli public. Trauma on a near daily basis, people losing their livelihoods and family members and things like this. And I think some Americans who listen to our podcast, and we at the Middle East Institute try to shape how Americans see the Middle East, they sometimes might see, okay, these two people may not get along. And here you are, you're on a tour, you're talking to other think tanks besides MEI, you're briefing current Trump officials and talking to them about what their plans are. And you work on this together. You're not trying to boycott each other, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and you know, I think this maybe is we're just an anecdote, but there are many like us, right? Ibrahim and I probably have more in common than he has with Palestinians who are militants with Hamas, definitely, or I have with a Haredi Jewish woman from Masharim who's never, whose views are very differently, right? There's so much. And it's not a zero-sum game, right?
Right.
What Ibrahim wants and what I want, and he's a Palestinian nationalist, right? It's not that we're either compromising on what we want for our respective countries, but this is not a zero-sum game. It's not like negating what Ibrahim wants would get me what I want. And so it's actually, it's very natural.
So you're win-win people. You think you have to live together and sort of work things out even if you disagree on things.
You're making it hard to respond. But I'll tell you, I think from my perspective, this is not that. I mean, Shira is a friend, and I actually consider Shira and people like Shira in terms of aiming for a peaceful resolution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict as allies of the Palestinian people.
Yes.
Also people, and especially the Jewish community, who still sort of like think and advocate and call for and work for a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on the basis of two-state solution, are as allies of the Palestinian people.
Yeah.
On our side, yes, there are those militants who don't really think that this, conflict is solvable.
Uh-huh.
And now, actually, we are in a phase where you have forces out there, right-wing forces. And in fact, let me just break it. Like in the US, in Israel, on the Palestinian side, who think that this is an ideological, religious conflict that should and must, by will of God, continue forever.
Yeah.
I disagree. And I ally with everyone who disagrees, from the US, from Europe, and definitely from Israel, because I'm one of those firm believers. I worked 20 years for the U.S. government, as you noted.
Yeah.
And I do know that the U.S. is always there to come and help Palestinians and Israelis move forward. But they'll never be in a position to impose it on us, not on Israel and not on the PA,
right?
Or not on the Palestinians.
It's got to come from you, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so this is why we need to cultivate and build alliances like these. Not because I'm compromising Palestinian national positions. No, it's about, I think what I'm trying to say is that this is not about, the conflict will end when it ends. But to me, the conflict is about reaching peaceful means to resolve it.
Yeah. So let me pull a thread on this before we get into the situation right now and talk about Trump's new administration and things like this. You mentioned the phrase right wing, and we're a nonpartisan organization here. We work with everybody across the board. We try to influence the discourse here in the United States. It was interesting to me that you lumped sort of the right wing trends in Israel and America together, which I see, and I see some commonality when you look at who's the incoming appointed, but not yet in position, Mike Huckabee, his views on Palestinians and things like this, and how it aligns with some in the Israeli government. Who are the right wingers in Palestine right now these days? Who would you fit in that category?
I would fit, many of the, not all, but many of the Hamas officials, supporters, and members.
Interesting.
I would fit people like in Islamic Jihad, people like there are so many even like leftist. And this is not about comparing, people. I know that there are sensitivities about that. I'm talking about the positions.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the positions meaning that they're backward. They're looking in their own ideology, rooted in religion and not inclusive. Sorry. And Shira's trying to get in here and she's smiling.
I'm just trying a two-finger here. First of all, I'm trying to be very nonpartisan about this. And you noted working at CAP, but I was also 12 years with RAND and a lot of defense background.
Yes.
So I'm all about the policy and not the politics. And also it's not a right-left conversation, right? And you could be hawkish on some things and dovish on other things. I will say from an Israeli perspective, and here you want to make this interesting, so I'll pick a fight with Ibrahim. We sense that there's no Palestinian left because the absence of a clear condemnation of the October 7th, a public one, even from my friends, not Ibrahim. Of course, Ibrahim was one of my first phone calls I got on October 7th, and there are a few others. But the fact that there hasn't been a condemnation by women's groups or human rights groups or groups that want democracy, because this is to Israelis an indication that everyone is sort of like right in a different way, and right or left in our part of the region. It's not about fiscal conservatism or Doge or issues that have to do with government efficiencies. How do you view Arabs or how do you view Israelis? And so from the outside, there seems to be different shades of right.
But your main disagreement with Ibrahim, which he wants to respond.
What I would actually say here and basically explain, which would get me in trouble with my fellow Palestinians, is that the left in Palestine is actually even more extreme than the extreme right. I mean, like take a group like the TFLP and those guys. I mean, like in their mindset, this is an all-out sort of like zero-sum game. Palestine is Palestine, historic Palestine type of position. But what I want to actually address the question, although I know it's sensitive and the answer might not really be amply like it doesn't really satisfy many Israeli ears, and I understand that. I think what happened on October 7 and the immediate aftermath of October 7 is what confused the public in terms of the attacks against Israeli civilians is something that I think, frankly, is condemned at all levels, including by majority of Palestinian people.
Right.
The problem the conflict, the nature of it is that with the immediate attacks, as it took place in the morning of October 7, you had massive Israeli responses that actually targeted buildings, civilians in a massive way, which actually pushed many Palestinians to take a step back and say, we condemn killing civilians on both sides. One of the weaknesses of the Palestinian mainstream peace camp versus the Israeli two-state supporters of peaceful resolution to the conflict is that we have been too quiet for too long, to a point that extremists and on both sides. And in my opinion, as a Palestinian, there is no big difference between Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, and the most radical people on the Palestinian side. I would be attacked for it by Israelis, fine. I would be attacked for it by Palestinians, fine. But in my opinion, anyone who denies the other and wants to impose, like a solution unilaterally with a radical view, like Palestinians do not exist. There is no such thing as Palestinian people, to me, is essentially a radical force that is leading us to more conflicts and more rounds of conflicts and taking Palestinian generations and Israeli generations into another round of violence for, in my opinion, in vain.
So
with all respect to ideologies and faith.
What you're describing here is what I've seen as a symbiotic relationship between extremists on different sides of the divide.
Yes.
They feed off of each other, and that there are people, and I lived in Palestine, we knew each other back in the 1990s when I was out there. And the other thing I would say, and I think there's some parallels here, and again, we are nonpartisan. We want to work with everyone at the Middle East Institute, but I think the political spectrums in Israel, in Palestine, and I see in the United States are fragmented. Even the phrases that we use, right, left, other things, there's a fragmentation and a disarray, I think intentional in place, used by different leaders, and including some strong leaders, including in Israel and other places, to preserve their positions, I think, in power. And that we're in this period of disarray and transformation. But what you two are saying is essentially the reason why you guys are friends, you work together, you disagree on certain things, is that you see, because you live, your two countries, Israelis and Palestinians, you live so closely together, you can't help but try to work it out rather than get into the sort of discourse that what you call the right wing wants to get everybody trapped in.
Yes, but I do have to push back, because it's easy to talk about the spoilers, and I agree that, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, they're the most extreme, right? This is the most extreme right-wing Israeli government that has ever been. But it's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about sort of the pragmatists, the moderates on the Palestinian side. Those people that were kidnapped and slaughtered from the kibbutzim and next to the Gaza bordering communities, they were peace-loving people. I mean, Vivian Silver and so many others, and Oded Lifshitz, who was just buried today. Yeah. And we don't, I will tell you that as an Israeli, we don't see those people on the other side. And I understand it's sensitive, and I don't live in a dictatorship, hopefully never, right? So I understand it's sensitive and difficult, but there is no reason in the world why, and I don't think all the Palestinians are complicit, but there's no reason in the world why it will be that difficult to condemn the killing with bare hands of a 4-year-old kid and 2-year-old baby. There's just no reason, or he was younger when he was killed. There's just no reason. And women and children and mass rape, right? And I think, frankly, this makes it very difficult for Israelis not to fall into these simplicities, accusations of all Palestinians are the same. Yes. They all endorse this. So I'm not talking about your extremists. I'm talking about the standard people, and I believe they don't support that.
Mm-hmm. No, I don't.
They don't support this, but they can, but they don't say it. Mm-hmm. And this is what you're not hearing on the Israeli side. And frankly, I think Israelis, what's ever left of the left or the center left or the center or even center right, is to hear that you have someone on the other side that you can relate to. Of course, I know that, but I'm not the example.
Right.
No, it's, I agree with Shira on everything that she said. And I think basically what I was actually saying before I got into the part that has to do with right-wingers. Right. I mean, yes, people with ideologies, they do exist, and you have to deal with them, fine. The thing is, when it becomes an existential matter to you and your national identity, then it's actually felt different. Right. So to you, it doesn't really pose any threat. But if I come and say, and I want to cancel you out, there is nothing as such as an American people, and I'm going to take over your land. Yeah. This is where the Palestinian reaction comes. And I can't actually change it. Even if I want to sweet talk, anybody, I can't really change that, because that's my natural reaction. Yeah. So that's one. Two, on the civilians. If we had a situation where there was, and this is not about justifying it, I'm just explaining. I think Palestinian people and everybody else on earth, any human being on earth, killing civilians, and definitely children and women and, uninvolved people and the way it happened. If we imagine a situation where there was the October 7 attack and there was one day of actually Israeli bombardment or Israeli killing, pinpointed killing of Hamas gunmen who killed those women, I think you would have seen many Palestinians coming out to say this is wrong. What actually happened is that 2 hours after, a few hours after the attack on October 7, there were buildings and people were being killed, including children, which pushed people to identify immediately almost with this side of victimhood rather than the Israeli side of victimhood. I want to add one thing, which I know Shira actually, may disagree, but essentially, even the Israeli public today, as we speak today, there are like 18,000 Palestinian children who were killed by Israeli military operations in Gaza.
Right.
Frankly, I overwatch Israeli media. I don't hear of anyone who actually condemns.
No, I hear this from Israelis as well. Yeah, so that's a challenge.
The issue is not really, to me, we're like beyond that. The issue, I think, is, and I understand the trauma on both sides, and I think moving forward requires much more courage and actually trying to build a better future. If we continue to be held hostages to extremists on both sides, let's not call them right-wingers so that it doesn't really go in conflict with
people's ideology. Ideology.
We are going to have much more than October 7. You were there in the 90s. In the 80s, we had the first Intifada, which was, more peaceful with stones. And then we got the second Intifada with suicide bombings and Israeli tanks and all of that. The level of violence actually goes higher with more generations coming, to become victims of it. Right. It will not stop. It will just not stop. And this is why I actually am sitting here and allying with Shira and people like her and with people like you and others to actually make the voice of reason. You know what? It's not even voice of reason. It's common sense. We either go to a path that takes us eventually to a much better future for the generations of both, or we continue blaming each other for what happened in the 40s and 60s and 70s and the 2023 and continue the same route.
Right. I will add one more. You said reason, common sense. I would say humanity as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that sounds so soft maybe to some people, but it's very basic. And what scares me is what I saw October 7th unfold. And I saw the reactions, and I understand what you're saying, because if you see people being killed in what looks to be indiscriminate bombing that blows up buildings and kills children and all of this, it seems like I hate to say this, one of the things that seems so human is to actually objectify the other side and say they're all the same.
Yes.
And because it's a fear instinct and things like this, but because you live it, I lived over there, I have dear friends on both sides of the conflict, and what you see is just the pain, right? Like, I don't know if you know Maher Issa used to work with us.
I know. His son was killed. I know.
His son was killed over Christmas. I got it over WhatsApp, and his son has a little son. So now Maher is a grandson raising a 2-3-year-old. And these stories just
keep coming.
And you only hear numbers, right? And I'm sorry. And I know we're supposed to be talking about policy. We're kind of off script here, but I think it shows you, I think what we're discussing here is the psychology, the pain. It's very human. That prevents all of us from actually getting to that common sense and reason, because a lot of this stuff just doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people.
Right, but there's so much pain, but also so much dehumanization. So you can't acknowledge the other side's pain. And, we're all policy wonks, right? But at the end of the day, I really think this idea of Palestinians and Israelis not seeing each other unless there are, for Palestinians, unless they're seeing armed Israelis, right? Either armed settlers or armed IDF soldiers. And for Israelis, the only Palestinians they see is those, who commit atrocities against them. And, it's not a wishy-washy thing. And I know people-to-people activities are hard to scale, and we're over that with Oslo and stuff. But the fact is, despite some plans here in Washington or some ideas or some visions, no one's going anywhere.
Yeah. And when I lived there in the late 90s, when I first met Ibrahim, I used to work in Sheikh Jarrah, but live in Ramallah and go back and forth and all of this. And I remember going back after seeing some friends at night, and Israelis would stop at these checkpoints. Because as you know, there are more checkpoints as a result of Oslo process. The peace process actually led to more separation, and that's part of it, but it led to this dehumanization. And young Israeli soldiers would say, "You live in Ramallah? You live in Ramallah with the Arabim? Do you like to live in Ramallah?" And they were just confused.
That's pretty nice.
Yeah, and it's pretty nice. You're there, right?
Yeah. It wasn't as nice.
I know.
In the 90s, so it became very nice.
So we really got off script, and I'm sorry for that. But I want to go back to where we are today. And again, as I said at the outset, this is coming out after what I think will be a tumultuous and set of events, and what may happen and whether the ceasefire holds. It's going to take a few days after we record it to get it out. Ibrahim, I want to turn to you. How would you describe here at the end of phase one of this ceasefire, 42-day ceasefire, the first phase? What does it look like in the West Bank? In East Jerusalem, let's not forget that, because there's hundreds of thousands of Palestinians there, and then Gaza as well. We all talk about that.
So what does it look like from the West Bank, not necessarily in terms of the ceasefire and where it's going?
Yeah.
So from the West Bank angle, first of all, like the situation has not really been quiet even before October 7 attacks, 2023. We had, serious confrontations. We had a problem of armed formations, and certain northern West Bank areas, including in Nablus and in Jenin and Tul Karim, which continue to be a problem or a security challenge for both, by the way, the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli security. But I think in terms of the ceasefire, for good or bad, if you will, as the ceasefire agreement was signed and guns were silent, although there are many violations, but still, like silent in Gaza, another sort of like front was opened in the West Bank 2 days after. And that was reported even publicly in the press that, there was some sort of like an agreement between the Israeli Minister of Finance, Mr. Smotrich, and the Israeli Prime Minister that there was, like the war will continue against terror. And this time we're picking, like basically the West Bank. And what sounded very much like the coalition will survive if you sort of like initiate a new military operation, and was big scale in the West Bank.
Was in the West Bank, was this an effort that just simply targeted Hamas and militant groups, or was it something that you perceive being something different?
Well, no, it targeted militants. Whether it's Hamas or not. Hamas is not a hotbed for Hamas. West Bank is not a hotbed for Hamas. Yeah. I mean, it has been under a hammer of both Israeli and the Palestinian security forces since 2007. Right. So there is no infrastructure for Hamas to attack. That is, they have sleeping cells, but not really big infrastructure. In Jenin in particular, there were Islamic Jihad, some loose Fatah people out there. But the thing that I think made this look like very much a political exercise than a military exercise, despite the fact that there are big numbers of Israeli forces, even Israeli tanks have been deployed, but you don't really have resistance or like clashes with armed gunmen and armed formations. There is no real war going on. There's a one-sided, almost Israeli military operation against houses. I mean, there are, and I don't doubt that there are sort of like, some explosive devices that have been discovered, but the level of force that actually has entered in the northern West Bank creates an image that there is a real, war going on, whereas most of it is things that the Israeli army and security have been systematically working on for years. It didn't require such a major deployment of forces in the West Bank.
What impact in the West Bank does that have on the Palestinian Authority, which is the interim self-governing authority, that was established in 1994, and it's still there? But how does that impact its legitimacy and how the Palestinian people?
It's huge. Actually, here you're talking about a narrative. Okay, so the narrative that even the PA was trying to actually provide to people, which is that, we need not resort to violence. We need not, do the October 7 example or attacks because we want to preserve, peace and security. We want to preserve, living needs for people and all of that. All of this actually has fallen. By the way, it didn't, again, as I said, like the West Bank was under fire even before, but it was under fire on a tactical level, not in a massive level. Now, today, one part of the problem maybe is that this Israeli agreement was made public. It wasn't like a conspiracy theory that the Palestinians have invented. So it was actually said by Minister Smotrich that I agreed with the Prime Minister that the West Bank is going to be like Gaza, even though the West Bank did not do what Gaza did. So, that actually, coming to the Palestinian Authority's version that we need to actually keep quiet because we want to preserve security, stability, your daily living and all of that has fallen apart. Like, what are you talking about? It's the same thing. This is Israeli government wants to eliminate the Palestinian national character, destroy the prospects of two-state solution. We are facing an enemy that does not want to compromise. So it actually pushes the PA into a corner that they have no counter argument. They have no, nothing to say to convince the Palestinian public. By the way, it's not only the military operations, internal closure. You can't actually move, from one area to the other between Nablus and Ramallah, for example.
So basic physical movement.
Basic physical movement.
And finances too, right? Like, isn't there a financial?
Finances, you just called it, like the Palestinian Authority, who does security coordination with Israel, is under punitive measures. That it doesn't get the Gaza share since October 7. It still pays its employees in Gaza, which actually doubles burden on the Palestinian Authority's budget.
Yeah.
The Israeli tax deductions, delays in actually passing them. The PA government employees, the government of the PA owes the Palestinian employees in the West Bank, which is nearly 200,000 people, multiplied by their families, you're talking about 1 million people, almost like 9 months of salaries that have not been paid over the past 4 years. So when you come to talk about a government that is not responsive and it doesn't really, bring in benefits to the people as a result of unpopular policy of security coordination, but rather even more Israeli repressive measures that people, feel, in addition to the internal problems that we have in terms of inefficiency, corruption, and all of that, you end up in a situation where the Palestinian Authority, if it goes to elections tomorrow, we have a very serious problem.
Yeah. So let me turn to Shira. And because you're a great analyst and you're not a domestic political analyst on Israel, you're a security analyst, and you got to read Shira's work at the Israel Policy Forum. Let me turn to you and ask two questions. One, why is the current Israeli government doing this? Again, I'm not asking you to evaluate in a subjective way, but what's the rationale behind it? And then second, you as a person and in discussion, I see you as a two-state person and things like this. What's your critique of it? So why are they doing it? And then what's your critique?
Okay, so we have to understand that raids in the West Bank are not a new thing. We've been talking about daily raids into Area A, which is, when the division of the West Bank under Oslo was Area A, Area B, Area C. Area A was supposed to be Palestinian sovereignty with no Israeli raids into. But the fact is that we've seen daily raids, maybe multiple daily raids for a number of years now. So this is not new. What happened on October 7 when Israel declared war on Hamas, it was war on Hamas everywhere and anywhere, including the West Bank. And started a campaign that you can't compare it to Gaza. It was overshadowed by Gaza, but 900 Palestinians were killed in the West Bank in this period, this is a very big number. It's not the tens of thousands that we're talking about in Gaza. So we sort of lost maybe focus on the West Bank, but we've seen this campaign in the West Bank going for 16th month now. What I think is different about what we're seeing at the moment is the length of the specific operation, which is longer than a month. And what you would hear from Israelis who support this, they would say, listen, what can we do? The refugee camps, those are places with arsenals of weapons, which is true. Like, there's so much weapon everywhere in Gaza and in the West Bank. And a lot of smuggling also through Jordan. There's so much weapon. We have to take care of the weapons. Ibrahim can go all into explaining how this is just like a marriage of convenience between different factions, not so much ideology, right? But all these places, and you have criminals and terrorists gangs. And all together. And we have to take care of it. Which is correct. And I will just want to remind people, Gaza, we had a barrier, supposed to be a really good one, cost some billions of dollars. You had a different border mechanisms to say in the West Bank,
24/7
cameras, border, the viewers, right? The soldiers who were kidnapped, the female soldiers who were kidnapped, they were supposed to just monitor the border all the time. They did, but no one listened to what they said, to their warnings. But yes, but in the West Bank, from an Israeli perspective, right, because of the settlers, really, it's all everyone's living together. There's a lot of integration between the population, and also even Israel proper, right? Like one of the main roads in Israel, route number 6, is half a mile from Tulkarem, from the refugee camp. So there was a real fear that what happened in Gaza could happen much more easily from the West Bank. So this is the security rationale. The problem is, as I said, the length of this operation, the way it was done, and the timing, because it was announced the day that this Israeli government signed the ceasefire hostage agreement. Bezalel Smotrich, I'll get to him in a second to explain why. Bezalel Smotrich, who is the finance minister and a minister and the defense ministry, demanded that in return for him staying in the government, despite his protests against the deal, the agreement, he demanded to add another war aim. And this war aim is the West Bank. So all of a sudden...
They don't call it the West Bank.
No, Judea and Samaria. By the way, your government is going to call my government. I'm a U.S. government, yes, a national too. They're changing the name here to Judea and Samaria, if you haven't heard either. But yes, the Judea and Samaria would be the next target of the campaign, adding it to the war aim, and then I will put in some numbers. I don't know if the numbers are public, so I won't mention the exact number, but they're over 10,000 IDF soldiers who've come from different fronts from Gaza and from Lebanon, and they're now placed in the West Bank. You have to do something with all those people. So all of a sudden we have checkpoints, we have the tanks, we have the timing of the operation, as I said, and also the fact that it was the Palestinian security forces. Finally, you would hear from some generals in the IDF that said, oh, we wanted the Palestinian security forces for 3 years. We've been begging them to go into the refugee camps and do something. So finally they go in and they do something. And then you tell them, well, get out. We're going to finish the job for you. So, and this is, I'm in the policy. It's really hard to disconnect it from the politics. I'll just say one word about Bezalel Smotrich, because I think it is important as we're talking.
Who is he? What is his position?
So Bezalel Smotrich, he's from the far right, a settler. Of course, he's the finance minister. It's a very important job because he controls the budgets. And he's the minister in the defense ministry. Bezalel Smotrich, I would say, number one strategist in the state of Israel. He, in 2017 or I think it was 2017, he wrote a plan. It was called the Termination Plan. No one read it. I read it. I also interviewed him. That's why I knew he doesn't speak English. I want to speak.
He doesn't speak English?
No, not very well. He came here. A lot of Jewish groups were surprised he doesn't speak English. I knew it. Anyway, Bezalel Smotrich, and this is where I give him most credit, he writes black on white, and he says what his plan is. And his plan is, we're going to annex the territory, and the Palestinians will be second-class citizens. And if they're unhappy about it, they're welcome to leave. E.g. transfer. And if not, we have the power of the arm to compel them to do what we want. So he lays that out black on white. This is a plan. It's available in English. I urge you to read it. And then he becomes very powerful minister because of a historical accident that made this coalition government in Israel really 50 shades of right. And he gets these extremely important portfolios. And then through very technical, boring changes in the bureaucracy that no one knows how he moves one file from the Ministry of Defense to a civilian authority, he's able to do whatever he wants in the West Bank.
So he's a man with a plan. Can I ask one last question and turn back to you, and then we'll move on to how Trump's handling this and how you perceive it from your vantage point. How different is that from what Benjamin Netanyahu, when he wrote a book in the early 1990s, and he had a vision for what it would look like? And if I recall correctly, the relationship was not that dissimilar. Maybe it wasn't as precise as you plan, but how different is it? And how would you characterize, and I know you're not a political analyst, but I'm trying to, from a security standpoint, how would you see the difference between the two men, and who's actually the more powerful man in the relationship right now?
So not only I haven't read Netanyahu's book. Smotrich's plan is much shorter. So I did read it. I did read it. I haven't read Netanyahu's book. I think that over the years, we've seen Netanyahu say some things, but also they're the revealed preferences, right? The fact is that, it's a term from economics, right? What do you do? And what Netanyahu has done throughout the years, by the way, including this year, are steps that indicate to me that he doesn't want to topple the Palestinian Authority.
Yeah.
Meaning he doesn't want to annex the whole territory. He doesn't want a Palestinian state. but he likes this arrangement, right? Kicking the can down the road, hoping something else will happen, staying in power. I think he's less an ideologue than Smotrich, who's a real ideologue, and I give him respect for that, right? Like, he's an ideologue, he says it, he practices. I don't think he needs to be in these key positions.
And by respect, you mean you don't agree with him, but he knows what he stands for, and he goes for it, right?
And he's candid about it, which I would appreciate all politicians being about it. I think, Netanyahu definitely doesn't want a Palestinian state, but he doesn't want to topple the PA. And we have examples even from the past year. And by the way, he's been saying those things. So he's an ideologue when it comes to Iran. When you say who's most powerful, so obviously Netanyahu is the prime minister, but I would argue that all the conflicting reports we hear about the ceasefire agreement are sort of like what do you call it, an arm wrestling between Smotrich and Trump, or Smotrich and Witkoff. We're not getting to Trump at the moment, but Smotrich, there are two partners in Netanyahu's government, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who was the minister of, he changed the name, I think it's called National Security, basically in charge of the police. He resigned in protest of the ceasefire agreement, but keeping a door open to go back to the government if the war resumes. They want the war to resume. And Smotrich staying in. And Netanyahu needs them to keep his government in power. So if his motivation is political survival,
he's got to listen to them,
and he has a trial and he wants to stay out of prison, he's got to listen to them. Yeah.
So let me shift back to Palestinian power dynamics. And we all know, and it's very complicated. We don't have time on this podcast to get between Hamas and Fatah and the divisions. And we will only cover Gaza, I fear, superficially, but we'll come back to it. Who's really in charge in the Palestinian Authority? Is there any doubt about it? And there's questions about, it's an aging leadership that's been there for a while. The last time I was in Ramallah, I'm sorry I didn't see you, was in 2022. And I noted to some of the Palestinian Authority officials that a lot of the same people that were in power when I lived there in the 1990s were the same ones. So who is really in charge, and who calls the shots now?
No change. It's the same people that you've seen in 2022. We're there since 1965. No, I mean, there hasn't really been any change. And this opens like a different sort of like level of discussion about it. But it's I think, who's in charge. I think we are in a situation where the PA/PLO Fatah is in charge of the West Bank and continues to administer that. Administer services to the Palestinian population, to be specific and precise, because they're not in charge of the West Bank.
Yeah.
And in Gaza, you continue to have, so far until this minute, you continue to have Hamas, despite the 16 months of war, basically are the central force that is controlling Gaza.
Yeah. So
there hasn't really been.
So they're not even down. Are they down, or they're not?
No, they're not down. One thing that I think, let me just explain this, because we are a very unique situation. We're not a country. No, seriously.
Yeah. I mean, no, I'm sorry to lie. I mean,
no, you're not. And this is the reality, is that people liken it. Oh, say this is like Afghanistan. No, it has nothing to do with Afghanistan. The whole concept of having an autonomy and a Palestinian Authority as a result of the Oslo Agreement does not mean that we are a real country. Hamas and its control of Gaza does not mean it's a state. It's never been a state. And what you have, even in the absence of the formal structures of government under an autonomous system, we have informal systems that control the situation. This was the case even before Oslo was signed. Even when you go to the 70s and the 80s and the first Intifada, for example, it was a coalition of factions that was in control of so many things at the law enforcement level through informal systems. We are not a country. We are a unique situation. So people make assumptions that sometimes actually miss the point. So yes, we had war. Yes, the government of Hamas and its buildings and its ability to deliver services have been destroyed, but that doesn't mean that there's a power vacuum. It has been diminished. Many areas went out of control. Other factions came up, warlords. Like decentralized system of control. But the main central force that continues to control Gaza is Hamas.
Yeah.
It's pure, it's very simple. And they meant to actually show that in the later controversial
hostage releases
and the handover ceremonies,
and even using the bodies of babies and peace activists that you were talking about as props, right? Like last week that offended and almost scuttled the ceasefire.
Yes. And even before they got to that, since day one of the ceasefire, they meant to deploy their forces and show that we are in control. So, like just to send a message to the Palestinian public in Gaza, to the Palestinian public in the West Bank, to Israelis, to the international community. And they raised slogans, no day after without us, we are the day after.
But does this mean all the people in Gaza support them?
No.
So tell us the attitude from as an analyst. How do they?
Well, as an analyst, I would actually say the following. First of all, I don't really believe in all the public opinion polls that were conducted and done especially during the war. Mm-hmm. People would not really answer whether those who were actually saying, and we had, almost a scandal of some polling actually says Hamas is 6% and others saying 75%, because clearly both polls were manipulated. Okay. The reality is that Hamas does have a core base of supporters because Hamas was incepted as and I think this, I'm talking to experts here, but also to the wider audience, that Hamas was incepted as a service and advocacy organization in 1987, and that actually built them, it's like social bases and incubators of support. And over the years, they transformed into what ended up a military wing, a government, and a political organization. This is what Hamas is, 3 structures. And one of those structures was destroyed in the war, in my opinion, not only in terms of, its offices and infrastructure were destroyed, but also its ability to deliver and reconstruct Gaza is non-existent. $50 billion is not something that Hamas can actually provide to the Gaza Strip.
Right. So you need
even
something
if you stop
else.
the war now, Hamas will have to face the Palestinian public. In fact, in my opinion, the weakest spot where Hamas would be actually cornered in is when war stops and reconstruction needs to start. And while they are in power, nothing is going to happen. That could actually even agitate people against them. Leaving that aside, their military infrastructure and military wing has been diminished substantially. Of course, it's not the same force that was on October 6th with all the rockets that they were, firing and all the, armed formations that they had. But that doesn't mean that they disappeared or will disappear, in my opinion, under, Israeli military attacks, because that is the nature of these kind of organizations, where they continue to flourish and recruit more people out of popularity that they could, harness, including in the West Bank.
So what you're saying, though, is there needs to be a political plan and alternative, and essentially where they're marginalized and defeated, that you can't do it with bombs and bullets.
You can reach a limit with, there are limitations to power, in my opinion. And I think that has reached its limit. And I think in order to actually, go into a new reality or build a new reality in Gaza, you need a Palestinian local partner. And one of the problems that we have with the current Israeli government is that it refuses to partner with the Palestinian Authority that it is partnering with somewhat in the West Bank. So you have a very there is a slogan that is actually mentioned, repeated by the Israeli Prime Minister, who says no Abbas and no Hamas. I think because it rhymes, it sounds like good to him. But I think, frankly, I'm confused. Like, who is it who's going to stand up and say, okay, no Hamas, that is effectively still in control of Gaza, and no Abbas, who continues to actually hold source of legitimacy in representing the Palestinian people for so many reasons, including having been elected 20 years ago. But still, who would actually push this, big power of Hamas aside, and the Palestinian Authority and the PLO aside, and say it's me? Like, it's not like. I think that not only that there is no plan, I think there is a plan which is destroying the Palestinian national character and its representation, which is the Smotrich plan.
Interesting. Yeah. So let me shift gears a little bit. And we're here in Washington, D.C. at the Middle East Institute headquarters. People who are listening should come by and see our art gallery, and we do great events online and doing great work here. Let's talk about the United States. And we're a little bit more than a month into the new Trump administration. And I want to keep it with Ibrahim for now and then come to you. Is Trump 2.0's return to office, he issued his Gaza plan. And you may have seen the video. We were talking about it.
Yes, I love it.
Why do you love it?
It's a fantasy thing. It's like this turns into
But
gas.
for the record, it's not the president's video. It's a video created by an Israeli, person that got to the president. The president shared it. So
there you go. Okay.
Okay. No. This is a very, very important point.
It's an important point. But
so
first statements were Jordan and Egypt should take the people of Gaza. And then later he said, and I'm just factually restating it, that America will take control and we'll own it. And it's our territory and everybody loves it, blah, blah, blah. How, you were in Ramallah, I think at the time, how did people talk about this?
Okay, this is very good when you actually say people, because I think there were mixed reactions. One is at the official level.
Yeah.
Definitely creating waves in Jordan and creating a shock in Egypt. And, taking a defensive position within the Palestinian Authority's official circles, like, let Egypt and Jordan deal with them, okay? In terms of average public, two things I think came out very clearly. One is that, which is actually, in my opinion, proven by the point that this video was not actually made by the president, it was made by an Israeli far-right, is that
I don't know that this is a far-right person.
Oh, really?
At this point, I don't have the identity, but this is not an idea that only the far-right in Israel favors.
We'll get to that in a second.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Why far right? Because the idea of relocating Palestinians, transfer of Palestinians, is not a new idea.
Yeah,
it's an old
1977 Likud party platform.
1948.
Oh, sorry.
So it in Palestinian memory, it actually recalls what Israeli. What do you want me to call them? Not right wing. What do you want me to call them?
Retrograde. I call them retrograde, like backward looking. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this, sounded an alarm. Like the president of the United States is actually embracing those ideas, which we had, heard about for so many decades now.
But it's not new. It's an old
concept. No, transfer of Palestinians is not a new concept. It's an old concept. But the new thing is that it is the president of the United States that is actually saying he wants to do it.
And this never happened before. You worked at the consulate.
I don't recall any president.
I'm just checking my facts. You worked at the consulate for a couple of decades.
No, I have never heard that, including the fact that, they're changing the West Bank into Judea and Samaria. I mean, there are so many things. Frankly, if we want to talk about the official level and the more, I was talking about the average perception.
But if
you talk about the more intellectual sort of like level of observing what Trump is about. I mean, we had Trump... in the first term of presidency, he shut down the PLO office in Washington. He defunded UNRWA. He closed down the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem. He made the Jerusalem Proclamation basically saying, and by the way, there is like something that I was working for the consulate at that time. The Jerusalem Proclamation itself in its third paragraph talks about Israeli future boundaries in Jerusalem. Sovereign boundaries in Jerusalem will be determined in final status negotiations, whereas Trump would actually come publicly, President Trump would come publicly and say, hey, Jerusalem was a problem. We took it off the table. No longer Jerusalem. It's for Israel.
So, but how many Palestinians still live in East Jerusalem?
360,000.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So those people are actually still alive and living there in their houses, right?
Yes.
Okay. So
of course.
It's still there and they're not.
Yeah. The Jerusalem Proclamation is about Israel's being Jerusalem capital, Jerusalem as a capital for Israel.
Yeah, I got you.
That's essential.
But these, just fact check.
Sure.
These Palestinians are not full-fledged Israeli citizens, are they?
Are you insinuating that when a powerful, wealthy person says something that he solved the problem, it means necessarily that he solved the problem?
No. I'm just trying to do what we do at Middle East Institute, which is deal in facts. And I lived over there, and I don't know if things had changed since I lived over there.
No,
yeah,
okay. They've not changed. It's the same thing. They're not Israeli citizens. They're Israeli, green card holders, if you will, by Israeli law, although they were actually all born there. Israel, took over the Jerusalem in 1967. It's not the other way around. They're not like alien residents. They're actually people who were there.
Yeah.
But regardless, they have an Israeli residency status. And that did not change. The Jerusalem Proclamation was not actually about that. The Jerusalem Proclamation was about taking off a problem called Jerusalem from the negotiation table and resolving it by giving it to Israel as Israel's capital. Now, did this actually solve the problem? No, it actually made it worse and more complicated because it pushed the Israeli government to embrace the position of the United States president. But didn't really solve any problem, not for Israel, in my opinion, and not for the Palestinians.
So to close off on this, and before I turn to her, so what's been the main reaction and not reaction, but impact? I asked you about reaction, but impact of what Trump has done in the first 5-6 weeks in office amongst Palestinians, has it inspired them to be more? Or has it dejected them?
No, I think, and this is my own view.
Yeah, of course.
I think at different levels. First of all, all the funding that has happened is actually, first of all, the PA was actually under punitive sanctions because of the Taylor Force Act anyways. So there was no U.S. assistance to the Palestinian Authority. The Taylor Force Act in Congress, which actually prohibits any financial or foreign assistance to the Palestinian Authority or its government organs in all levels and shapes and forms. It even prevents advocacy or work of or it doesn't even give visas to Palestinian officials to come and advocate on it's a total sort of like prohibition on PLO activities, and this is related to pay to slay. That's why it's called Taylor Force, which is like the
I'm sorry for our listeners. This is what's pay to slay. This is a phrase that we use.
Pay to slay is a payment system that the PA had introduced back in the days. In fact, it's an old system since the 60s, where those who actually are imprisoned by Israel or are killed, by Israel,
their families
their families actually get compensation and monthly stipends, and it's by virtue of being victims of the Israeli occupation.
I see.
Now, this over the years got very complicated, and there has been an enormous pressure on the Palestinian Authority to fix it. They did actually fix it just recently, and now it's being certified and actually,
Didn't they fix it at the same time as the Trump administration cut off funding for the Palestinian Authority security forces around the same time?
Around the same time, but I don't really think it's related, frankly. I think this came
part of the freeze.
Separate, but came the same timing, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, sorry, we could go on forever. I want to ask Shira, how has Israel, the government and the people, reacted to Trump's, not only his plan on Gaza, but then his initial, the visits of Rubio and Witkoff and others? What's the general sense right now?
So I'll start with just the real positive, and we have to give credit when credit is due. There's a sense that Israel would have not agreed to the ceasefire in Lebanon, and definitely not to the ceasefire hostage agreement with Hamas if it wasn't for Trump coming into office. We've seen the Biden folks try to do this. It's basically their agreements. They negotiated the details, right? But we had the Trump.
It took like a year and they didn't get it.
And it didn't work. The Trump effect, the fact that he said he wants the war to end, this was almost like a gift to Trump by Israel. We will give you the agreement. We will withdraw from Lebanon. And I think this is where we have to give credit. I think Ibrahim would agree, right? This is also the perception in Ramallah, that because of Trump and Witkoff, his envoy, we have a ceasefire agreement.
Absolutely.
100%. And this is why you see the hostage families going on with their appeals to Trump. Please look how you saved our families. Please keep pressuring. I don't know if those people, even the American citizens among them, are necessarily Trump supporters.
Mm-hmm. But they just want their families home.
They want their families home, and they want to, thank him and give credit. And I think they're deliberately not thanking Biden, even though they know how many the extent of the efforts that he has invested in this, because they don't want to piss off the president. So this is where I think that the immediate effect has been, and it's been a positive one. On the Gaza Riviera idea, I refuse to call it a plan, because a plan is something that has a timetable and a budget, and this is just an idea with some nice images to accompany it. Ironically, the only place that should know better that this was taken seriously is Israel. Israelis across the board, and I'm saying this is not a right wing. It used to be the transfer idea. When you saw it transferring Palestinians to a different country, this was the Kahanist, the most extreme version of Israeli politics. Kahana was obviously a terrorist, an American terrorist, right? Also outlawed in Israel. But when it's represented as, it's just we have compassion for the Palestinian people who can live there, right? Seeing those images of Gaza, it's really an unlivable place. How can you live here? We will promise you better lives elsewhere. Israelis across the board say, like, of course. Even Yair Lapid, the head of the opposition, was in town. He said it publicly. He said any liberal should be supportive of voluntary migration. Now, of course, I'm supportive of any Gazan who wants to move elsewhere. I was trying to help children from Gaza to get out during this war.
Yeah.
I wasn't successful. So it's not that easy. But more importantly is that it wasn't just accepted by the public. The government is actually embracing this as an idea. There's been a vote. There's been a vote in the government. The Minister of Defense, it's all public information that I'm disclosing. The Minister of Defense decided to establish a directorate, an interagency directorate, examining how to expedite the voluntary migration of Palestinians from Gaza. I don't know to where, but they're in the polling stages, right? Who wants to go? And I don't know how they get out of there. So it was taken seriously. And my concern with this, and we're talking about sort of the implications of this, is that clearly, President Trump threw out something, an idea, and he keeps doubling down on this, but there's no commitment of no U.S. forces are going to come, right? There's no U.S. resources are going to be put into this is just going to own the Riviera after all the people find somewhere to go to. What happens in the meantime is Israel is sort of embracing this idea. There's a vacuum. The Arab countries are scrambling to find a counteroffer, which they will present presumably March 4th. And in the meantime, what is happening? Everyone's playing for time. The Israeli government is playing for time, trying to extend the first phase of the hostage ceasefire agreement.
Yeah.
Hamas is entrenching its de facto control, and
of Gaza,
really everyone is losing.
So again, here we are. Podcast is coming out around the same time that the leading Arab countries are meeting, and I've talked to people who were in the Riyadh meeting last week or earlier in February, and I think we can anticipate what the Arab governments might say. Ibrahim, to you, in this context, we just talked about Trump's plan or non-plan or whatever you called it. I forget what you called it, Shira. You called it an idea, a brainstorm.
He might call it a vision. I call it an idea.
Idea. That's what it was. What do you expect the Arab governments, including Egypt, which is a lead sort of partner in all of this, but Gulf states, to present? And does it align with what the Palestinian Authority that we talked about?
Yes, I think first of all, the primary reason why the Arab countries are coming up with a plan is basically to respond to the idea that President Trump put forth. Because
so they had no ideas before this?
I don't think so. At least not at the official level. I mean, like they had some ideas, but not in a formal plan that would be presented in the Arab summit to be
unified.
I think all of this actually came in response to the statements or the idea that was presented by President Trump.
I don't want to interrupt, but there were. I mean, we even wrote something together about comparing the different plans. So there were maybe non-papers, but they were like kernels of
plans.
But this was formalized,
not like a unified
plan.
Formalizing unified.
Yes, there were different plans. We had an Egyptian plan, an Emirati plan, a PA plan, and so on. But this came as a reaction. That's why to the Trump statement. That's why I personally don't really think that this plan is going to be necessarily an actionable plan for the following reasons. One, it came to ensure that there will be, it's an effort to convince Trump and the administration that relocating Palestinians to Jordan and Egypt is a bad idea. They need to stay there. And, and that's for security concerns that they have, national and their own domestic security issues. Second is the fact that so far there is no Israeli position on any of the ideas that are being formulated in coordination with the Palestinian Authority. And we'll have to see whether it will be in full coordination or not, because, the plan seeks to reinstate a form of governance in Gaza. And that's the easy part, because, you can bring in a committee that reports to the PA or the PA itself, technocrat or, camouflage PA, however you want to look at it or see it, security arrangements. And what happens to Hamas in terms of day after, and whether or not they disarm, they go to exile or not, I don't really think that this will be part of a formal Arab plan that will be endorsed in an Arab summit, and that it will be in line with the Israeli demands. And therefore, I think that this plan is more about deflecting pressure, putting things, back in a context where they could live with, and try to navigate the problem further. So March 4 is not going to be the day where the problem is solved. It's going to be the day where intensive contacts will start. And, I mean, you've been there so long enough.
So this is the start of another longer conversation, right? That's the story of the Middle East.
I bet all my money. I don't really have that much, but I bet all my money.
You better save it for the green card. Now there's the gold part.
So I think we have a general sense of what might be offered here. This current Israeli government, Shira, that you've described, and you described Smotrich, Ben Gvir, who's out there, others. There's other less well-known names like the diaspora minister who's against the ceasefire and hostage deal. How do you think they're going to react to this, and how do you see it from the Israeli side of, okay, there'll be this offer, where does this go?
I mean, obviously, they're going to be very skeptical, and I'm being careful with my words.
Right.
They're going to dismiss the plan. I will tell you, though, this is where I'm skeptical also, right? As someone who does not necessarily identify with this government, because, okay, this is sort of like if we all are in agreement that Hamas should not be the sovereign of the Gaza Strip and should not be the government of the Gaza Strip. No one has a good plan, a good suggestion for how Hamas disarms, how Hamas leaves, how Hamas doesn't adopt the previous, what we call the Hezbollah model, right? They're not going to be in charge of the boring job of taking care of the civilian needs, but they will just rearm and be ready for the day of action. I don't see a good plan, and I don't know that the Arabs are going to come with a good plan. So I think the skepticism is merited. Now, there is a limit, and this is where my argument is with others. And as we've seen throughout the 16 months, of war in Gaza, right? This has been an intense war, and Hamas is still standing.
Right.
There is a limit to the military instrument. It has to be accompanied by a diplomatic instrument, by something.
You need leadership, you need vision.
You need leadership, you need a vision. And there's also, there's a lot of research that was actually done at the RAND Corporation, where I was before IPF, about, nation state building, which is what Gaza is akin to, right? And this is lessons learned from East Timor and from the Balkans and from Iraq and Afghanistan, and places where it succeeded and places where it failed. As you dismantle one entity, you're supposed to build another. This is called the golden hour. There's a window to doing this, and we missed the window. I hope for sure it's late. I hope it's not too late for this, but we need a good answer for what do we do with Hamas? Because Israel says, okay, Hamas can exile. Well, they'll leave. Ibrahim can explain to you why it's going to be much more difficult to convince the Hamas leadership, who consider themselves living on their lands, right? It's not like Beirut, to leave the Gaza Strip. And what does it mean? And we have a problem. Now, the other side of this is the fact that no matter, and Ibrahim and I looked at this, every other plan calls for some other Palestinian nucleus governance piece, and you will get regional support. And I'll give credit to the Arabs who are willing to do more for Gaza than they were ever willing to do in history, right? And in international support. But you need this nucleus Palestinian force. And guess what? It's a two-party system. It's either Hamas or Fatah. Fatah means PA. Israel refuses to say Palestinian Authority in Gaza. Ibrahim alluded to it. Even though not only they cooperate with the Palestinian Authority in Gaza, in fact, they work with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. They work with the with the Palestinian Authority Palestinian Authority in Gaza every day. And I will tell you this, who do you think the IDF spoke to about fixing a water pipe during this war inside Gaza? You speak with Dr. Mazen Ranaim, the head of the Water Authority in Ramallah. So, the PA was the second largest employer in Gaza after Hamas. And also now, as part of the ceasefire hostage agreement, Israel agreed for Palestinian security forces in uniform to man the Rafah crossing with European supervision. They're telling the Israeli public, the Netanyahu saying, no, this is not the Palestinian Authority. These are folks we've been working with another context, but it is the Palestinian Authority and they're in uniform. So in a sense, we have this sort of like, there's the legitimate question of what do we do about Hamas, all of us?
Yeah.
And the politics, which intervenes.
So Ibrahim was laughing there, but
Shira... No, I'm laughing because it's no Hamas, no Abbas, and no UNRWA. That's the Israel. So I have no idea. Like, anyway.
Yeah. So Ibrahim, Shira, we all work in the think tank industry and we deal in facts. And you're essentially saying that there's facts and then there's narrative and political narrative that political leaders use to advance things. Really sort of quickly, and this is a tough topic, but I want to just get a brief reaction first, starting with you. There's been this debate in America and it's quieted down right now because the conflict is not what it was. I fear it may flare up in some ways. How did you're an American, right? You said you're American. Can I see your passport? Can I? No, sorry. No, I'm just kidding.
I was born here. I was born in New York.
Yeah, but you're Israeli American and you live in Israel. You've got little kids. I've met them. I've been to your house. How do you see the debate here in America since October 7th? And how does that impact you? I'm not asking you an analyst question. I'm asking you a personal question. And you can say, I don't want to answer that. But
no, I will answer that. I think, we tend to take things to the extreme, especially I feel like in the United States. And there's no nuance at all in the debate. Now, I can be forgiving to college students who it's all about intersectionality, right? If you care about minorities and you care about climate change and you're vegan. I lived in Santa Monica for many years. It's okay. So you'd be pro who you would think it's weak. But frankly, I think it just misses, the nuance of the debate. And by the way,
the humanity.
And the humanity. And I will tell you see this also, the counter response, right? On the other side, it's all just like pro-Israel and we can't talk to these Palestinians. And I think it is really super important to amplify these voices of Palestinians. I give Ibrahim here full credit. Ibrahim is going and speaking in synagogues like a Palestinian coming out of Ramallah. I'm hoping not getting you into trouble, but it's super important, right? That also Americans in general, but also American Jews hear from Ibrahim, and there are a few others that I've done this with them that actually go talk and show that it's complex. It's not easy. It's a difficult conversation to have. It's not in sound bites. I don't know how you do this on TikTok, but this is what we have to engage in.
Yeah, so. And I guess what I'm trying to get at, Ibrahim, and like we met many, many moons ago, but this whole, people are passionate about Palestine in ways that I've never seen before, and you live there, but how do you see a lot of that passion and the impact and what it's had since the war? And I know it's a challenging question. So
it's a challenging question in the following sense. I think there are many people who simply fall victim to the doctrine that actually says, and this is what we're facing, and this is why I do speak, and I actually urge others to speak, and I would even go more into trying to build an alliance between American Jews, Americans in general, Palestinians and Israelis who are supportive of a peaceful resolution to the conflict on the basis of the creation of a Palestinian state,
right?
On 1967 lines, okay.
Two-state solution.
And there, if you try me or anybody else to actually say, hey, what about like an autonomy with a little bit more, like privileges, you'll find me to be a far right sort of like oppositionist to that idea.
What about confederation?
We can restructure, we can structure and restructure the solution if you end up giving the Palestinians their national identity and their sovereign home. And it has to be some sort of, confederation, cooperation, full integration, however you want to look at it, security, development, economic, high-tech, health services, education services, whatever, between the two states.
Yeah.
But that's a different, now what we're facing is basically a threat to the national Palestinian identity by, plans like Smotrich's plan. Now, what my take is, how do you actually go about it? Is by lobbying and working and collaborating and cooperating with everybody who matters and those who do not matter to preserve the two-state solution.
Right.
This is essentially it. And I don't really see a more powerful ally than, like Jewish American community, for example, and Israelis in Israel
believe in that.
Actually to believe that. Now, if they think that the Palestinian state is going to be security threat to the existence of Israel, my job is to explain why not and why it would not be and what kind of arrangements could be done and all of that, because we are defending the essence of, the principle and the core idea of a two-state solution. In my opinion, the two-state solution not only about Palestinian national aspirations, it is, but it's not only about that. It's about the future generations. Brian, you look at the situation. How is it different, over the past? I'm not going to go back to history.
You're turning the tables on me? You're asking me a question?
No. I'm just saying. The Palestinian teenagers in 87 and the Israeli teenagers were the ones fighting in the first intifada, the second intifada, and now this. And in 20 years' time, if there is no resolution to the conflict, they will be fighting.
Yeah.
And people will be taking positions, and those will be dismissing, and those will be condemning, and those will. It is time. I think my contribution is basically to find and be a bridge and contribute to a process that ends it. As simple as that. So
thanks for lifting up your voice. I the last time I was back to Ramallah and Palestine, I mentioned was 2022. And I saw some dear friends, and you know them well, Arif Jafal and Sam Korade and things like this. And I thought we were talking a little bit about, I'm sorry, this is personal, but all of those ideas that we had it was grounded in a two-state solution and everything we were doing on the ground. And you were at the consulate at the time. And a lot of them both of them were like, look, we just want basic dignity. Like we have kids and they're growing up, and we want something. Oftentimes I think here at think tanks, we forget about that basic human element, and we come up with paradigms that are so disconnected from that basic human element. And I thank you for you both being here. I want to ask you one last question. I know I'm pressing the limits of time, and I don't know what'll be here. Ibrahim, starting with you, and then I'll come back to you. Shira, a key audience that I have here is the people who Americans, hopefully they're listening to, is next generation. What got you into this? What brought you here, not just to this podcast, but this line of work? You founded a think tank. What was the spark for you to join the consulate in Jerusalem? And then what advice would you give to people who are in there?
I want me to tell the story of my lifetime.
No.
1 minute, 2 minutes, but I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
I am a Palestinian activist, okay? With a very, I think, clear ideas and messages and doctrination that actually goes on both sides. One is to my fellow Palestinians, and one is to, like debate in the U.S. By the way, I have to say this, I just feel a burning desire to say it. There has been a podcast that I've listened to between Elon Musk and the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. And they were a podcast between the two. Yeah, I mean, it's on Twitter. Get it, man. That's it's an X. Sorry. And they were actually saying and talking about de-radicalization of Palestinians, people that you just referred to,
right,
in Ramallah and elsewhere. And they were saying, like, look, we defeated Germany and we defeated Japan, and the dark forces were actually defeated, and they were rebuilt, and a new culture came in. And I wish I could actually go into that podcast and say, yes, but Mr. Prime Minister, Germans had Germany to rebuild.
Right.
And Japanese had Japan to rebuild.
Right.
So if you want to radicalize the Palestinian people, you need to give them hope.
Right.
You need to give them their homeland so that they actually, you take them into, the reconstruction and construction process and de-radicalization and all of that. And I actually stand here to tell you that I think if this happens, the overwhelming majority of Palestinians will actually go that way. And then you can defeat extremism. But if you want to maintain occupation and control and de-radicalize the Palestinian people, good luck with that.
Right. So you got to create coalitions. You've got to build relationships with people that you don't agree with 100% all the time.
We can resolve the differences peacefully.
And think for the future. Beautiful. Sure. How did you get into this? And what would you say to a 20-something, to someone here, sitting here, even older, what they would do? How did what was the spark that got you?
Sorry, I just have to respond to the previous question. I do think that we are all using the two-state terminology, and it's a terminology that is not cannot. It sounds tone deaf to Israelis. I think it's safer to speak about steps to have a peaceful separation constructive separation between the two sides until we can get to a state. So I do think
I got you. Yeah.
I think
set the conditions is what you're saying.
We can't be talking about two states. As long as how do I get into it? I just, it's funny. It's personal, but I found a poem I wrote when I was in third grade. I was 8.
What?
I can't write poems today. It's not a very good poem, but there's something about, in Hebrew it sounds better, but anyway, it's about like why are we at war with the Arabs? So I think, I was born with a sense of like, this is an artificial construct. What is this like war imposed on us? And I just moved to Israel in the 80s. So I remember that, but long story, but then throughout the years, I worked, Brian, when I met you, I actually left a hedge fund job in New York. I took the Chinatown bus to get an unpaid internship at MEI. This was my first job in Washington, unpaid job. You helped me get my first paid job.
At the Middle East Institute, you took an unpaid because you had a passion for this. Okay.
I was at the Middle East Journal, and my parents, of course, were like, are you out of your freaking mind? I mean, you're leaving a paid job, with a hedge fund in New York, getting on the Chinatown bus, getting here. And I didn't listen to my parents. So I would tell the 20.
Sorry, Ima. Sorry.
I know my bank account would have been in a better situation today. Now they're proud of me, but for many years they're like, "What do you do?" They don't even get it. They don't know what my job is. But I would tell you, don't listen to your parents. Follow your heart. And this is one. The second thing I will say is that I have I studied in my undergrad biology and computer science.
What?
And I'm saying this because I did like other education and my PhDs in something completely different. Yeah. And I'm only saying this because I think we tend to think that there's only one way to get to a career. And I'm the living proof that there's not only one way. There are many, many ways. So I think just do what you're interested in. Work hard. I don't believe in shortcuts.
Yeah.
Don't mince words. Don't self-censor. Prove it's really good for all of you that Brian is your boss. Prove indispensable to your.
I'm not a boss of anyone, by the way.
I know you stop being manager, but
I'm not very bossy.
Prove indispensable to your supervisors. Then they can, and just like be into it,
Well,
that's
Shira, Ibrahim, thank you for your passion. Thank you for your courage, because it's not easy in these times of war and people losing family members and things like this to talk about these issues in this way. A salute to you. Appreciate you. Saha. And thanks for taking the edge off the Middle East. That's all the time we have this week. Thanks to our listeners for tuning in and to our colleagues for their work on this week's episode. You can follow MEI on X, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and subscribe to our email newsletters for the latest analysis and information about upcoming events. I'm Brian Katulis, and we'll see you all next time.